But right now we're traveling to a west side Garden of Eden. The doors were opened and the first Mass was said here at St. John's. When we come back, we're going to take a look inside this magnificent structure. But right now we're traveling to a west side Garden of Eden. It's a neighborhood not unlike most, located near downtown, tightly packed tenements where ragweed and sumac are the only things growing. What's different about this 2-acre plot encircled by 9 feet of chain link is its people. Located on West 38th and Franklin, it is plowed, planted, cultivated, harvested, nurtured, and loved. This special attention is the result of a unique program called Rurban. Started 5 years ago by Reverend Charles Fry, it now includes 276 families.
To involve people in the city and people in the rural area and try and build some kind of bridges of communication. We wanted people to be able to grow some of their own food and build some sort of sense of self-reliance. We wanted people to learn to work corporately, to share knowledge, information, experience, all of those things, and work cooperatively.
Cooperation and organization have been essential in developing the program. Bringing together Westsiders of all different ethnic backgrounds, this is truly a United Nations of gardeners. Most brought skills from places like Puerto Rico, Eastern Europe, Vietnam, Mexico, and West Virginia. Coordinating this group was no easy task, and some of the local folks had reservations.
People were a little suspicious, particularly in this neighborhood, but in every neighborhood. What are these people up to? This is a weird idea. I can't see anything wrong with it, but little, you know. So it took a couple of years before people began not only to see what the idea was, but begin to see that they could do it together. And that's been one of the great things that's happened.
Maintaining an organic, regenerative approach to their gardening means a reliance on some unconventional techniques. The use of cold frames in the spring acts as a miniature greenhouse to start young plants. Another means of nourishing the soil is the use of fish emulsion, which is made from decomposed fish. One of the backbones of the entire system is Connie Anderson. Together with Charlie, she oversees the daily operation of the garden, something she does just out of love.
I like the community spirit, and they asked me if I would. You know, I like pitching in. I like working in the garden. Gardening's kind of a two-way street, first of all, because there's so many people. It's social. It's also a very private thing. You know, you get real close to nature. It's very peaceful. This is a very, very relaxing atmosphere here. And even though it's right in the heart of the city, a lot of people miss that.
As the garden grows, the gardeners retire to the office to pore over organic gardening books. Slugs, aphids, and cutworms become the common enemy, but the common theme remains: grow.
Second bed.
Well, you're born on a farm, you never get out of it. It's always in you. So, it's like you can take the boy out of the country, but you can't take the country out of him.
Transplanted from West Virginia, Thelmar Robertson is the patriarch of the garden. Called Grandpa by some, it is not unusual to find Thelmar working from daybreak until dusk. When you consider that the average portion of food travels 1,300 miles before reaching your plate, some Westsiders are fortunate that theirs only travels a few blocks. A godsend to those unemployed or on welfare, centers like this one at St. Patrick's on Lorraine provide sustenance for the needy. The gardeners gladly put in an hour a week in the market garden, raising herbs and specialty produce for West Side merchants. A green leafy vegetable called cilantro is a favorite among the Puerto Rican community. While at the Min An restaurant, a vegetable called raw mung is used in many Vietnamese dishes. Both of these vegetables are typically grown in California, and are never as fresh as those grown by the West Side Eden. The program fills many needs for the gardeners, but most important is the awareness it creates.
Getting people to realize that they can grow their own food and that they can grow nutritious vegetables, and it doesn't cost them a lot of money, and it makes them feel good, and they have control over part of their lives, that they don't have to consume all the garbage that's on the market.
Charlie takes a more philosophical view of the garden's role in society.
It's all part of the same system, and you and I are part of it. We don't run it, not really. We don't own it, for sure. We either live with it and understand it, or we lose it. You know, we've seen people in this garden who lived in this neighborhood for years and didn't talk to each other, and after they worked together for a summer, you know, they have a different kind of relationship.
If for no other reason, this 2-acre piece of dirt on West 38th and Franklin deserves to be called God's Garden. A Wild West-style roundup in Virginia. We'll have that when PM Magazine continues.
How was the garden initially perceived by the people of the area?
Well, it began as kind of a second step after the food center, the emergency food center, was organized as a way to try and get at the root cause of hunger in a little deeper kind of way. And there was a lot of interest in the neighborhood, but it wasn't very focused. So we began with 2 or 3 families in 1976 and started gardening. And all of us had no experience. None of us had any experience doing what we were doing. So as we started, we had a notion that we wanted to try and do a couple of things. And one was to involve people in the city and people in the rural area and try and build some kind of bridges of communication. We wanted people to be able to grow some of their own food and build some sort of sense of self-reliance. We wanted people to learn to work corporately, to share knowledge, information, experience, all of those things, and work cooperatively. We also wanted to try and deal with the real world in terms of marketing crops. So we sort of put all those 4 things together, and that's kind of the guidelines of the whole project. And since '76, it's grown by bits and pieces.
How was it received initially?
Well, it was received with 2 kinds of reaction. One was, gee, that's a good idea. And silence. Go get them. You know? And the other thing that was obvious at the beginning was people were a little suspicious, particularly in this neighborhood, but in every neighborhood. What are these people up to? This is a weird idea. I can't see anything wrong with it, but little, you know. And particularly here, and understandably in this neighborhood, you know, the neighborhood has been messed over by untold numbers of programs and people, and, you know, people get a little nervous. So it took a couple of years before people began not only to see what the idea was, but begin to see that they could do it together. And that's been one of the great things that's happened.
They see that.
Yeah. And not only that, but they see it working with people from Wayne County or people from the far west suburbs. And at first, you know, they're total strangers. They don't know who these, you know, we meet together in real strange, tense atmosphere. And now, at our board meetings, for example, which represent all the 4 garden groups, we can't get the meeting over with. Really, you know, people say, I want to go home, but they keep talking. It's that kind of relationship.
Tell me a little bit about that interaction that takes place out here. A little bit of some of the stages that some of the gardeners go through once they start to get involved here? So
Well, it starts out usually with curiosity. What are you doing? In fact, there was a guy here today on the bike. Yeah, well, it sounds really interesting. What do I have to do? So you explain, you know, what's involved. And yeah, okay. And some people just never show up again. But enough people come back, you know, 276 families this year. And you show them the plot and explain what they're doing, and they're obviously tentative at first. Some of them need a lot of help with the gardening techniques, and they sort of work on their own plot, and then they look around a lot and they watch, you know, and then they'll start asking questions, usually of Connie or me or somebody they know, and then pretty soon they're asking questions about a neighbor. Well, you know, what's this? What are you doing that for? What? And those kind of things happen. And then pretty soon, they start doing things. Well, I'll get that for you. You want to use my, you know. So then they start trading the hose and the hoe, and what are those seeds? Listen, yeah, and why don't you try some of these? So they're trading seeds, and it begins to go like that. And then they begin to talk about, well, next year I'm gonna do, and they start planning, you know, and it's sort of that kind of progression. And the one gal today, as a matter of fact, who was doing the fish emulsion, she said, boy, oh boy, after 3 years, she said, I didn't know if this was going to work, but boy, it really is great, and it works good. And next year, this ground has improved so much, and you know, she's got big plans for next year, and she's all cranked up about it.
Isn't it a wonderful personification of the initial spirit that you intended this whole thing to have?
Yeah, it really is.
I mean, that's just...
And it takes time, and that's one of the most difficult things, time and money. But it takes time. It takes time for people to learn the kind of holistic, regenerative sort of idea we've got about agriculture and about people. And it takes time just in a 20 by 20 plot to learn how to do it, you know?
To digress for a minute, tell me a little bit about the influences of your youth on the approach that you're taking here. Where does your background come into play here?
Well, I embarrassed my folks, you know, when they read an article, a comment I made that I grew up in a rural slum. Not that we were that poor, but we lived in a neighborhood of folks who had come from out of state, and they were poor. But it was in a rural area, so I grew up. First experience I had was making hay with horses, so it's, you know, got that kind of background. And then I remember Uncle Rufus Esselburn. Okay, he's my hero. He's really my uncle. Lived near Mansfield. Was a truck farmer. Farmed with horses. Hauled the produce about 4 miles into town and sold it. And he's become my hero, well, a lot of reasons, but he sort of typifies the way food was produced in the 30s, 50 years ago or so. And the changes that have happened. From 50 years ago, my uncle Rufus Esselburn, and in Cleveland, you know, I mean, food was hauled in from way out in Westlake. I mean, where there was nothing but farms. Or Avon Lake, there's nothing but orchards, you know. It was hauled clear into Cleveland. Not long ago, the Defense Department did a study that indicated that the average portion of food today travels 1,300 miles. Now, there's some big changes that have gone on, and I think, you know,
Short period of time.
yeah, and we can talk about that as a real important part of it. But I grew up in that kind of background, somehow, you know, aware in kind of a vague way of the land and how people used the land and how important that was. And came to the city years later, worked here, and somehow the connection happened between all of that I had grown up with and sort of was floating around someplace in my memory, and it showed up in the middle of the city, and there was a connection that seemed to me to be real important.
Great. Not only your background, but you're bringing together people from a lot of various backgrounds here. Can you briefly tell me a little bit about the variety of people and prior experiences that they might have?
Yeah. In the whole network, there are people who live in the central city, in the inner city. There are people who live in the suburbs, people that live in a village, a very small village, and people live in a small town. And all of those, neighborhoods have their own characteristics. And we're talking about people here in this garden, for example, who learned their gardening skills in Puerto Rico or in Mexico, or some in Eastern Europe, some in Mississippi, West Virginia. They learned these garden skills years ago and migrated to the city for a lot of complicated reasons, and bring all those skills with them. And now they have a place to do it again. It's like coming home. It's like getting in touch with your roots. My God, and people really get into it. And the connection with those folks who have come from a long way to this city, being connected to folks in Wayne County, for example, who live in a town, they might have lived there for 4 or 5 generations, and a whole different background, and they can garden. And these two kinds of experiences come together, and they really feed each other and support each other. And they compare notes and share all kinds of experience that way.
Change tape.
Mm-hmm. I guess the way I talk about that most often is the Old Testament biblical story in Genesis. Part of the creation story is reported that God has said, "Let us create human beings in our image." And when that was done, in a word, God said, "You are in charge of this creation." It's as if God, put all of this strange and mysterious and incomprehensible thing together, and he said, "Okay, you're in charge of it. You take care of it, and be sure it's fruitful. And you name the animals, and you take care of it." And the question I always have is, how are we doing? Because for me, that's a fundamental notion that we are in charge. And we are not in charge for our benefit. It's like we were given that responsibility. Didn't ask for it, okay? I wasn't there. I didn't ask for that. It's just laid on you. And the New Testament notion that follows that for me is the whole sense of cruciform. That is to say, that the meaning of life is not in getting or owning or consuming, but the meaning of life is really in giving up your life that something else may live. It happens every time we eat food. You sit down at the table, and that cow, chicken, hog, lettuce, food has given up its life so you can live and nourishes you. And that's where life really means something. With all of the struggle and all the anguish and all the problems that go with that, that's fundamental to me. That life is found in that giving oneself, in whatever sense you can do that. And I think that's what people discover. And that fundamental notion that we are in charge of a responsibility that was given to us is a very tough notion to try and sell. That's not the way the society goes. And yet, historically, you look at cultures and you find that cultures that forgot that lost it. So for me, that's what's going on, and that's the sense that in the middle of this city, or in the middle of Wayne County, out on some farm someplace, it's all part of the same system, and that you and I are part of it. We don't run it, not really. We don't own it, for sure. We either live with it and understand it, or we lose it. And the understanding of it, you know, is so incredibly exciting and challenging and mysterious that nobody needs to want for anything to do. You know, they're just, you know, in a handful of soil, we don't even know. I mean, the best that I've read, we don't even know everything that's going on in there. We don't even know. We can't even name all the bugs that are in there yet. But that's the direction I think we ought to be putting our energy, instead of some of the ways that we're going. So, you know, when you talk about you know, what's God got to do with all this, that's kind of the way I see God having to do with all this.
Everything.
Well, yeah, and the tough part of it is the learning to take that sense of responsibility. You know, there is joy and there is satisfaction, but it ain't fun and games, in a sense. You know, somehow the values that well, if you make a mistake, you can fix it. There are limits to that. You can't always fix things. Well, there's a lot, I think there's a lot of this regenerative notion of agriculture that's related to that whole biblical understanding.
Not a lot. I was a city gardener, you know, housewife with a backyard, and this particular house where we live is very tree-laden, shady, and that kind of thing, and I tried to grow a garden. And the girl I babysat for said, gee, you should come up to Kentucky Garden where I live. You know, you can grow a lot better garden. And I came up here and I was amazed at the way things grow up here, because, you know, the land has been really taken well care of. And I liked the community spirit, and they asked me if I would, you know, I like pitching in. I like working in the garden. And they asked me if I would help out with the marketing end, you know, on the committee. And I did. And they said, not enough people are working on the committee. We need to hire somebody to do it on a part-time basis. So I was very familiar with the West Side Market, and then, you know, as a matter of course, I just went to different stores and asked, do you need, you know, anything from our garden, you know, and explained everything, left a card with the produce on it and that kind of thing. And pretty soon the Spanish store was interested in cilantro, and then it blossomed out. And then last year we did a marketing research. Charlie got a grant from Ohio to, and I wrote the marketing research book to write the book, and then they gave us the grant to start a marketing project on a larger scale. And it went very well. We had a lot of people participate, and they said, this is what you can make money on. And we took all of our information from the previous year and what people wanted and who bought, people coming into the garden. The gardeners themselves would buy things. Spanish store, and like on, and the market. As a matter of fact, I think we have more customers than we can handle. We could probably sell everything we could grow if we, you know, reach the right market.
Did you know at the time that things were going to evolve that much? I mean,
No,
could you tell?
I thought it would kind of dwindle down to,
Sure.
you know, back to the committee and within the garden, because most people at first seemed very isolated. You know, they wanted to grow their things. But it seems like we got a better system going, you know, 1 hour per week per plot, community time. And then when people saw what was happening, they really enjoyed it. And they liked the fact that we're well known in the neighborhood for, you know, this and that and the other thing. You know, we have good cabbage, and then people that like organic vegetables came in to see us, and they remarked on the fact that our stuff looked real nice, especially for organic. And we had a lot of people that started the garden that were enthusiastic and real good organic gardeners, you know, like Charlie and like Susie with the fish emulsion and that. And, you know, we weren't afraid to pick up and learn from them because we started, you know, from, yeah. And of course the herbs are a money maker because, you know, they're herbs. They're not they don't take a lot of care or cultivation. But the cilantro was hard to grow, you know, and I learned a lot from the Puerto Rican people that came, and they took a real delight in it. And Carlo showed me how to grow, he said dulce, which is a new kind of pepper that, you know, that's real expensive. Comes from Santo Domingo. It goes to New York. By the time we get it, it's very old. But if we can grow it fresh, it's amazing what they, you know, they really want it.
They don't want it?
And there's a big squash that they sell. It's called calabaza. So we're going to cultivate that this year. And we try to also follow the organic gardening books, you know, the ideal garden. We have asparagus in the early spring, and we have strawberries, and we have a few things started, blackberries. Of course, mostly due to Thelmar, you know, because whenever I didn't have anything else to rely on, good old Thelmar, he knew how to grow everything. Yeah.
And even if he didn't, he told you he did.
Right, right. Because of the asparagus, I said, you know, the book says, Thelmar, that you're supposed to cover this up a little at a time. He says, well, we're going to dig a big hole and we're going to throw them in there and they're going to grow. I mean, if they're good, they're going to grow. And they grew.
What has the gardening done for the people in this community?
I think it's brought them closer together. And I see no friction between ethnic groups, racial groups, even neighborhood. We have somebody that comes from Lakewood. We have some people that live in Cleveland Heights that work in the area. And as a group, they come down here to garden. And, of course, gardening is very good therapy. So we have the Westside Mental Health Group, and we have Astor Carrera Resource Center, ARC, they call it. And those people come in to garden, and they've seen remarkable results in their mental outlook because of gardening. Then we get people that are retired, seniors like Carlo and Miguel, and some people that from ARC that can't work regularly because of their condition, you know. And they come in and they're so enthusiastic about working someplace, you know, and feeling that they're really worth something. And they really, you know, they're like my right hand, you know. They come in here when I can't, and they show me things. And
What is it about the gardening? What is it about the actual process of gardening that enables people to get this kind of benefit?
well, gardening's kind of a two-way street, first of all, because there's so many people. It's social. It's also a very private thing. You know, you get real close to nature. These are your tomatoes, your babies. You know, you did this. And when you're weeding, you know, or whatever, you can get down, you're all by yourself, and you can think about things. And it's very peaceful. This is a very, very relaxing atmosphere here. And even though it's right in the heart of the city, a lot of people miss that. Kathleen misses that. She doesn't know what she'd do with it. She hadn't come here from the country. And Thelmar, he came here when I was working last year and said, I want a garden here. I've been trying to get into this garden for a long time. And he comes early in the morning with his key and he checks out everything, checks for the potato bugs on his plants and this and that. And then he comes and tells me, you know, this has to be weeded over here and these need to be sprayed and that kind of thing. And, it's just getting back to basics, I think, you know. We were created for this kind of thing.
Yeah, I think you're right. Tell me who some of these people are that come here, not necessarily who they are, but what kind of groups are represented, and, you know, what are these people, where are they coming from to come here?
We have a lot of people from the neighborhood right here in Ohio City. A lot of them have been here a long time, so they're not the elite that have come since it's been restored. They're people that settled 20 years ago, you know, with their families, Mary Hartman and Anna Crum. Mary Hartman came from Pennsylvania, from a farming family, her and her husband both. And Anna Crum was from West Virginia. Thelmar's from West Virginia. He's been here for a long time. And they're just neighborhood people. And then the Puerto Rican people have been here just recently. But all of them are farmers. And they just kind of zoom in on this like a magnet. You know, they see things growing and they come here. Connie Fanning is a social